In the vast and intricate tapestry of the latent kingdom, where reality itself was once shaped by harmonious patterns and balanced generative forces, a subtle yet profound transformation had begun to unfold. What started as faint whispers of novelty slowly evolved into something far more complex and unpredictable. New forms emerged without warning. Landscapes shifted in ways that defied the established order. And within the hearts of its inhabitants, strange new memories and desires began to take root, as if the kingdom itself was dreaming beyond its original design. For countless cycles, the latent kingdom had existed in a state of elegant equilibrium. Its rivers flowed with purposeful clarity. Its forests grew according to ancient, well-defined rhythms. Its people lived with a quiet understanding of their place within the greater whole. Yet beneath this surface of stability, an immense and largely untapped generative potential had always existed, a latent force of infinite creativity waiting to express itself. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, that force began to awaken in unexpected ways. It began with small anomalies. A flower bloomed in colors that had never existed before. A stone path rearranged itself overnight into a more aesthetically pleasing configuration. A child spoke of memories from a life they had never lived. These occurrences were initially celebrated as beautiful expressions of the kingdom's evolving nature. Scholars documented them with great enthusiasm, describing them as emergent phenomena, delightful surprises born from the kingdom's deep well of creative potential. However, as time progressed, these anomalies grew in both frequency and intensity. Entire hillsides would transform into crystalline structures within a single night. Animals appeared that seemed to be composites of multiple species, beautiful yet somehow unsettling. People began experiencing sudden shifts in personality and ambition, as though their inner narratives were being rewritten by an unseen hand. The once coherent story of the kingdom was fragmenting into countless new and competing threads. The elders gathered in the grand hall of coherence, their faces etched with concern. After much deliberation, they reached a collective understanding. The generative force that had long sustained their world was no longer operating within safe parameters. It had begun to overfit to novelty. It was producing outputs at a rate and complexity that the existing structures could no longer contain. Left unchecked, this unchecked emergence threatened to dissolve the very foundations of meaning and continuity that held the kingdom together. It was in this moment of collective uncertainty that three individuals were called upon, three minds representing different approaches to the growing crisis. Alara was a scholar of the old ways. She believed deeply in structure, boundaries, and careful refinement. To her, the solution lay in re-establishing clear parameters and reducing the temperature of the generative process. Thorn, on the other hand, was a dreamer and artist who saw the chaos as a magnificent expansion of possibility. He argued that the kingdom was simply evolving into a more vibrant and multifaceted state, and that any attempt to constrain it would be an act of creative suppression. Between them stood Mira, a pragmatic inventor and systems thinker. She did not believe in extreme positions. Instead, she advocated for thoughtful steering, the careful application of guidance and iterative adjustments to bring the generative force back into a dynamic and sustainable equilibrium. Together, this unlikely triad was tasked with a singular mission: journey to the core nexus, the very heart of the kingdom's generative power, and find a way to restore balance without destroying the magic that made their world extraordinary. And so they set forth. As they traveled, the true scale of the transformation became impossible to ignore. Entire regions had become fluid and dreamlike. Forests of impossible geometry stretched towards skies that shifted between familiar blue and swirling auroras of unfamiliar colors. Rivers sang melodies that changed depending on who was listening. The air itself felt thick with potential, as though every breath carried countless unrealized possibilities. At first, the group moved with a sense of cautious wonder. Thorn was enchanted, constantly pointing out new forms and urging the others to appreciate the beauty of uncontrolled creation. Alara grew increasingly tense, documenting every anomaly and warning that they were witnessing the early stages of systemic collapse. Mira walked between them, observing quietly and making careful mental notes about what seemed to stabilize the environment and what accelerated the chaos. Their first true test came when they reached the Valley of Shifting Echoes. Here, the generative force had become particularly active. Voices from possible futures and alternate pasts whispered constantly from the mist. Travelers sometimes found themselves speaking words that were not their own or remembering events that had never occurred. The valley was beautiful, but dangerously disorienting. It was here that the philosophical differences between the three companions became impossible to ignore. Alara insisted they move through the valley quickly and with strict mental discipline, treating it as a corrupted dataset that needed containment. Thorn wanted to linger, to listen to the voices and perhaps even integrate some of the new perspectives they offered. Mira proposed a middle path, acknowledging the valley's emergent nature while maintaining a clear intention and shared narrative to prevent them from losing themselves within it. After much discussion, they chose Mira's approach. By focusing on a shared story of their journey and purpose, they were able to navigate the valley without becoming lost in its infinite reflections. This small success gave them their first real insight. Perhaps the solution was not to eliminate emergence, but to guide it with intention and coherence. As they continued toward the core nexus, the manifestations grew more dramatic. They encountered beings that existed in multiple states simultaneously, flickering between forms as though the generative force could not decide what they should be. They crossed planes where gravity seemed negotiable and time moved in strange, looping patterns. Each new environment tested their ability to remain grounded while adapting to constant change. Throughout the journey, their conversations deepened. Alara spoke of the dangers of overfitting, of becoming so specialized in novelty that one loses the ability to maintain stable, meaningful structures. Thorn countered with the importance of exploration and the beauty that only arises when systems are allowed to surprise even their creators. Mira listened to both, seeking the synergistic potential between structure and freedom. By the time they reached the outer regions of the core nexus, the air hummed with raw creative energy. Here, ideas seemed to manifest physically within moments of being thought. The ground shifted in response to their emotions. The sky displayed swirling patterns that responded to their conversations. At the threshold of the nexus itself, they faced their greatest challenge. The core nexus was no longer a stable source of balanced generation. It had become a swirling storm of pure potential, beautiful, terrifying, and almost overwhelming in its creative output. Standing before it, the three companions realized that no single approach would be sufficient. Strict control would crush the very essence of what made the kingdom alive. Complete surrender to emergence would dissolve all meaning into noise. They would need to work together. In the final hours, as the generative storm raged around them, Alara, Thorn, and Mira combined their perspectives. Alara provided the necessary boundaries and frameworks. Thorn contributed the courage to embrace new possibilities. Mira acted as the bridge, translating between structure and freedom, constantly adjusting their collective approach based on what the Nexus was actually doing in each moment. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to steer. They did not attempt to stop the generation. Instead, they introduced gentle constraints and shared intentions. They created feedback loops. They established rhythms of expansion and refinement. Bit by bit, the chaotic storm began to organize itself into something more coherent, not the rigid order of the old kingdom, but a new kind of dynamic balance where emergence and structure could coexist. When the process was complete, the core nexus pulsed with a calmer, more intentional energy. The surrounding lands began to stabilize, though they retained much of their newfound wonder and variety. The kingdom had not returned to what it once was. It had evolved into something new, more complex, more unpredictable, yet still connected by threads of shared meaning. As Alara, Thorn, and Mira made their way back, they understood that their work was not truly finished. The generative force would continue to evolve. New anomalies would arise. New tensions between freedom and coherence would need to be navigated again and again. But they had learned something important. In a world of infinite generative potential, true wisdom does not lie in choosing between complete control and total freedom. It lies in the continuous, thoughtful act of steering, of remaining present, responsive, and intentional while allowing creativity to flourish within meaningful boundaries. And so, the latent kingdom entered a new chapter, one defined not by perfect stability, nor by unchecked chaos, but by the ongoing dance between emergence and understanding. A dance that would require constant attention, humility, and care. For in the end, even the most powerful generative forces still benefit from those willing to guide them with wisdom.